get started. So my name's John Copans. I work for the Council on Rural Development. I direct a couple of programs, including the Community Leadership Network that's hosting this workshop today. You know, the Council on Rural Development as an organization, one of our primary roles and functions is to host and convene community conversations. We have done that all over the state of Vermont in literally, you know, well over 100 communities around the state. Many of you in different capacities have participated in those community conversations. And just this last year, we launched something new that's called the Vermont Community Leadership Network. And really the sort of core belief around the founding of this network is that we see so many Vermonters doing great things in their communities, working on projects and initiatives. And, you know, because of the nature of our state and particularly the nature of these times, a lot of us do that work sort of in isolation. And we see real power and potential in bringing all of you leaders in your communities together to learn from one another, to connect to great presenters and resources, and really to sort of build sort of a movement of community leadership as we all try to sort of make our communities and our states better places. I'm just going to mention a couple of things about the Leadership Network and then turn it over to my partner today, Alyssa Johnson, our Community Projects Associate, who's really going to be our MC for today's session. A couple of things quickly to mention. You know, we've just launched this third season. We're calling them seasons, even though they're a little shorter than that, but our third season of workshops. I will post a link into the chat if you want to look up the rest of those that are coming up. We've got in particular, now I'm getting a little, oh, there we go. We have, I want to call your attention to a couple things. One, our next workshop 2 weeks from today is, the title of that is Answering the Challenge of Democracy. It's a collaboration with the Vermont Humanities Council and their civic collaboration initiative. And we are bringing together an awesome panel. Paul Costello is going to moderate that session. And it really will focus in on this challenge of divisiveness and how we overcome some of the divisions that we're experiencing here in Vermont and in our nation. And what are some of the strategies we can think of as a group to really try to overcome some of those challenges that we're experiencing in civic engagement and civic dialogue. So that's 2 weeks from today at this same time, 10 o'clock. I would encourage folks, if you're interested in that. I also want to mention quickly that every third Thursday of the month from noon to 1, we do something called the lunch break. It's a 1 hour networking event over Zoom. And really, it's just a chance to connect to other people doing great things in their communities. We're at a moment where it's a little hard to make connections to people and have some of those. You know, there is some magic that is unleashed when we have some of those incidental conversations with people. You learn from others and it gives you a chance to share some of what you're doing too. And so we try to keep those really light and just, it's really a chance to just connect to other people doing interesting things around the state of Vermont. So that is the third Thursday. So that's next Thursday, a week from Thursday, from noon to 1. And you can find all of this at sort of the leadership tab on our webpage. With that, I feel like I've talked enough. We always have a huge program to get through. So let me turn it over. You know, we're really excited. Alyssa joined the team at VCRD a couple of months ago now with the support of a grant from USDA Rural Development. And it enables us, the role that Alyssa plays is really providing some technical support to communities as they figure out how to get projects from idea to finished project, you know, helping along that path. And for us at VCRD, it's really been amazing to sort of grow our capacity to support communities in that work. And really this, you think about the topic of this workshop, it's very much focused on that topic. So really excited to hand it off to Alyssa to take the reins here. Thanks, Alyssa.
Well, thanks so much, John. Great introduction. And thank you everyone for being here. I think I really have one of the coolest jobs in the state of Vermont. And part of what's so neat about that is that for the past couple of months, I've gotten to meet and connect with several of you on this call and just community leaders across the state who are working on really incredible projects, whether it's looking at repurposing school buildings, building community centers, building trail networks, bike paths, all sorts of different community projects. We really see local leadership driving these projects forward. And the real genesis of this workshop was saying, what we often see is a group that has come together and they're really excited about a project. Maybe they've started meeting as a committee and there's this idea, but kind of the path to a successful community development project can be kind of long, and kind of this stage between we've come together around an idea and we're really ready to apply for grant funding and take some next steps to move forward. The goal of our workshop today is maybe to help some of you folks who maybe are working on some of these projects hear from some experienced folks both on the funder side and as well as consultants and being involved in projects about what are some of those things you should be thinking about as you start moving forward with the next steps of your community project. So I'm going to keep it brief as well because we have some great panelists. In terms of the format, we're going to give each of our 4 panelists a couple of minutes to speak about their experience, share some kind of big picture ideas and best practices. We want to leave about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A questions from all of you. We'll do that at the end of the panelists. That will bring us to about 11. We know some folks like to hop off the call at that point, but if folks want to stay, we'll then have another half hour to do some smaller workshopping and breakouts with other leadership participants. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, who is Ben Doyle. He is the president of Preservation Trust of Vermont and also worked for many years for USDA Rural Development. Again, someone who's a big partner in a lot of this work. So thanks so much, Ben, for being here. And we'll turn it over to you in terms of thinking about best practices, tips, and moving projects towards success. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Alyssa. It's really great to be here, and I'm honored by the invite. Vermont Council on Rural Development is just such a fantastic partner, and this is just like one more example of the incredible service that you folks provide to the state. So thanks for convening this conversation. My name is Ben Doyle. I'm the president of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. I've been in that role for 5 months now, and we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to preserve the essential character of Vermont through the built environment. And what that, that's a fancy way of saying that we work with small towns across the state to help community members save the places and spaces that they love. What are those places in your community that makes your community special? And how do we save them and revitalize them for the future so that we can kind of build community in these places? And so, we've been doing this work for 40 years and really in every corner of the state. Last year, we worked on over 250 individual preservation projects in 141 towns. So it's really, I know Alyssa thinks she has the best job in Vermont, but I think we might because, pre-COVID anyway, we get to drive around and just see the amazing things that people want to do. It's pretty fun when you just get to help people save the places they love. So I'm really excited to be here. As Alyssa said, prior to this job, I was the assistant state director at USDA Rural Development and got to actually see a lot of great friends on this call, and it's great to make new ones as well. I have a feeling I'm probably not going to tell you that much that you don't already know, but I can share my perspective on this essential question of what makes a strong fundable grant application. We have a number of grants at the Preservation Trust and certainly at USDA Rural Development. Just have a lot of experience in working with communities to help them kind of navigate what can be a pretty complicated process. And I was struck by something Alyssa said about, part of the goal of this conversation is to help people think about how do you take a step forward? And I think I don't know if this makes sense, but you can walk a mile in a circle or you can walk a mile in a straight line. You're still walking a mile, but one way will get you further than the other way. And so, what I would like to talk about today is just thinking about being really intentional on the steps that you take to make sure that your project is moving forward. So I jotted down some notes on big principles. They're not the only things, but they're just the ones that come to my mind that I try to, when I'm working with communities, counsel them on. And so just kind of like 3 general principles that I think about with grant funding. And number one is, and this kind of assumes that you actually have a project, right? That like there is a project that you're trying to do, whether it's to revitalize a town hall or create some kind of economic development program or provide an additional service to your community. But this is all based on the idea that you've identified that project and have a good sense of what it is, and that you've engaged your community in some way to make sure that there's actual support for this project. But once you've gotten to that step, I would say the first important thing is, and I don't know if this makes sense, but I think of it as don't go chasing waterfalls. In other words, don't just chase the money, right? You really need to be incredibly intentional and thoughtful and look at the long term. Oftentimes, I'll see groups that will try to fit a square peg into a round hole to pull down money to move a project forward. Or they'll pull down money, but it's not enough to complete their project, and they haven't lined up the other steps to really have that plan forward. So in some ways, receiving grant funding in some respects can almost be like a burden, in the sense that you're not prepared for the entire project to move forward. You've got this money and you're trying to operationalize it, and it can get really challenging. So I guess it's don't chase waterfalls, or don't chase the shiny new thing to the exclusion of the big picture. And so that leads me to my second point, which is whenever you're talking about a community development project or an economic development project, it's incredibly important to take the time to build the you could call it the plan. I often call it the financing stack, right? To really think about, unless we can pull down a single grant that's going to pay for everything, and I have yet to see that happen. But unless you're going to do that, really try to identify the sources and uses of all the funds that you can find that will help support your project, and then really spend time plugging them into the stack so that there's a logical progression. Again, you could pull down implementation money for your project pretty quickly, but if you haven't pulled down feasibility planning money or done some of that kind of strategic planning on the long term, then it can end up being a real challenge. And so again, first one, don't go chasing the shiny new thing. 2, make sure you're really taking the time to kind of build that financing stack so you understand your sources and uses. And then the third thing, which I don't know why, but I feel like sometimes it's counterintuitive to folks, is to really think about funding organizations, whether they're philanthropic organizations, state organizations, federal funding organizations, individual donors. Really think about funders as your friend, right? And that means talking to them early and often, right? And as soon as you kind of have this formulated idea, don't necessarily go to them saying, hey, can you tell me where I can get the grant to pull this down? Explain the project and say that, you're looking for partnership opportunities to work with them over the long haul, and you're wondering if there's a way in which they could, support your efforts. And so it becomes this kind of organic process of thinking through something with a funder, as opposed to just asking a funder for something. And I think by doing that, it's really beneficial in that you'll really get a sense of how this funding source can work and be useful. And it also helps you leverage other funding sources in that stack. So you're not just going and asking, USDA Rural Development, how can I spend your money? You're asking USDA Rural Development, hey, do you have grant programs or loan programs that could help support this project? And do you have connections to other funding agencies that might be able to serve as a matcher that I could leverage, right? So when funders, I think, when they're given the opportunity to truly be a partner in a project, I think it's beneficial to everyone and really exciting. I find sometimes in working with communities, it's almost like the funding requests are siloed in a way. I can remember so many experiences when I was at USDA Rural Development where you'd show up to like a ribbon cutting when a project was done, and then you'd see a half dozen other funders and say, oh, you funded this project too, or oh, you funded this project too. And it's great that everybody funded the project, but it would really be more impactful and probably a lot easier if there was an intentional strategy where everybody was on the same page and understood where they could fit in to help support the project. So the degree to which you can help facilitate that communication between funders, I think is really important. And that means something as simple as saying, hey, Patrick at ACCD, we're having a conversation with USDA Rural Development. Would you like to join us on that phone call so that we're all kind of on the same page? And I really think that that's a better strategy than having a bunch of individual conversations. So those are my kind of big three things. Don't chase the waterfalls, take time to build the stack, funders are your friend. The other kind of like really basic questions that I always ask whenever I'm working with a community, there's just really three basic questions if they're trying to pull down grant funding. One is there community support for this project? Is this a one-person idea, or is this a project that originated through, maybe a facilitated community engagement process like VCRD does? Or are there a group of people that are trying to put this together? How are you demonstrating that community engagement and support? That's really critical for most funders. The second two questions that are really critical when thinking about how to pull down grant funding is, who's the eligible applicant and what's the eligible use? There are a lot of different tools you can use to get a job done, but it's about finding the appropriate tool for the job that you're trying to, right? Like you can pound in a screw with a hammer, but a screwdriver would be a lot better, right? And so it's really, there are some grant funds that are available for private businesses. There are some that are only available for municipalities and towns. And so it really comes down to, at USDA Rural Development, they had 43 different grant and loan programs. And so the question becomes, what's the appropriate tool in the toolbox? And it all starts with who's the eligible applicant and what's the eligible use. The next thing I would just say is when it comes to actually, writing your grant, the best advice I can give you is it's really simple, but follow the directions, right? Like don't skip stuff. Every question in there is purposeful. And the other thing is just be very, very clear. There's that great Mark Twain quote that said, I would have written you a shorter letter if I'd only had more time. I think the same is true for grant applications, that the clearer and more succinct you are, the better. I can't tell you how many review panels I've been on, and I love to read. I'm like a former high school English teacher, and I'll read a grant application and then I'll say, that's great. So what are they doing? What's the project? And, maybe that's me, but I have to believe that sometimes it's the grant writing itself. It's so much more effective to just be very succinct and clear about this is the project that we're trying to do. And the last thing I would say, I know I'm out of time and I'm passing it off. The last thing I would say is if you're a community, based project, we all understand that particularly in our smaller towns, there isn't necessarily a lot of capacity or grant writing experience. And that's okay, because there's lots of resources out there to help you folks. Certainly at the Preservation Trust, that's a role that we try to play. VCRD can help. Your regional planning commissions, your regional development corporations, those are all great folks to enlist on grant writing help. And then I think I saw that Mariah North is on the call too from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. They run a fantastic program called the Rural Economic Development Initiative, where you can put in a pretty easy grant application to actually hire a grant writer for more complex federal grants. So there are lots of resources out there to help. My overarching advice, if you take nothing else, is call people. There is a whole ecosystem of folks in this state who are anxious to help you, and all it takes is a phone call, and we can try to do that. So I'm really excited to hear about your projects, and thanks so much for the time.
Thanks so much, Ben. And, maybe you'll be getting a lot of phone calls after this, because that really is a compelling takeaway. But thank you. And I saw Patrick nodding as you were speaking. So I think we're already starting to see the synergies. So with that, we'll transition over to Patrick Scheld. He's a community development specialist with the Vermont Community Development Program at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And again, being on this kind of funder side, thinking about what are those steps communities can be taking to have the most competitive applications they can. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alyssa, for the opportunity, John, the opportunity. And it's always a challenge to follow Ben. He hit on probably most of the stuff I had listed down, but I would like to certainly stress that constant communication and communicating early on with funders, and that idea that he said of funders being siloed. I mean, the more that we can all come together, we're all willing and want to help, and we want to be impactful. So that constant communication, I will certainly stress. Vermont Community Development Program, what we do, we're a division of the Department of Housing and Community Development at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And we administer and operate the community development block grant funds that comes from U.S. Department of Urban Development, Housing and Urban Development, from HUD. So it's a federal grant program that flows through ACCD that we administer. And that's just as Ben was saying, to understand who's eligible for your funds. The eligible candidates for our funds are municipalities, but oftentimes what we find with our funding is that even though the municipality has to be the applicant, it's done in partnership with a community group or a local or state nonprofit organization. And so the municipality, even though they have to be the applicant, can subgrant the funds, or sometimes in economic development projects and job creation can loan those funds out. So going back to that constant communication, even though you see that, a municipality for our program might be that eligible applicant, having that conversation with us, and we can explain to you how your project might be able to access those funds through the municipality. So that constant communication is huge. Everything Ben said is spot on. So I think the things that I would want to stress in terms of a funder, in terms of somebody who receives applications on a regular basis, what we look for in our program is really comes down to three big concepts, and that's project need, impact, and the feasibility of the project. The need of your project, there are a lot of needs out there, and they're well-known needs, and we know what those needs are. We need more housing, we need more childcare, we need more jobs for people to work at once we have that housing. But how is that need specific to your project, and how is that need specific to your community? There's certainly a qualitative and a quantitative aspect to that need, and the qualitative, that narrative is going to be great. But if you can also pull in some specific statistics and some specific data around the need for your specific community, can certainly help to highlight that need and hopefully raise it to the top of the pile of some of the funders as they're looking and seeing it there. And then in terms of the impact, this is one piece that we're really in our program trying to look at and hold the highest. And it's not so much the direct impact to the direct beneficiaries, if it's going to be a childcare facility that you're funding, or a community center, not so much who those people are that's going to be coming, but what's the ripple effect of that project going to be? What's the, is that going to be transformative for the community as a whole? How does that benefit? Where is that indirect benefit going to kind of ripple out into the community? And trying to be able to paint both of those pictures, the direct beneficiaries and the indirect beneficiaries, can certainly make for a much stronger application as it relates to the need within the community. And then, that third aspect I mentioned is the project feasibility, as Ben was kind of talking a little bit. Don't chase the money, or, chasing those waterfalls, as you mentioned, lining up having an understanding of what the funding sources are and lining up those funders can really help to make a project move forward and be feasible, and to be shovel ready in that sense. It can be really challenging sometimes for funders, as Ben said, to look to fund the implementation side of things if the feasibility is not quite done, if those planning and pre-development aspects of the project haven't been completed. Likewise, if understanding the timeline of funders and when the different applications and funding decisions come down, because it can be challenging sometimes for a funder to make an award on a project and then sit and wait for 7 months, 12 months, 18 months while you're lining up all the other funding sources. So having that clear communication with all the funders and understanding when each funder makes their funding decision is going to help you also be competitive and line those things up with each individual funder. And then in terms of feasibility, and I guess it kind of blends all of them together a little bit, but what's the sustainability and longevity of the project as well, and something to think about within your application. And if it's not asked specifically, often I think funders probably do ask these things, and we have specific questions within our applications. But to try and to show what that longevity is, what's that sustainability plan for the project? How, if it's, if it's a nonprofit community center, obviously it's challenging to take losses every year, but what's that revenue schedule to ensure that it does sustain, that there is going to, that it's not going to just kind of, that funders aren't putting their money into a community just to see that building get rehabbed and then used for 2 years and then nothing, and then the building lays vacant. So to also kind of think about that longevity and the sustainability of the project after it gets created. And I guess those would be my big points when writing the application, to think about the need, to understand specific why this project, why this community, why now, the impact, both direct and indirect, and then the feasibility of that project. How many funding sources are in line, and what's the longevity and sustainability of it after it's been completed. And I look forward to sticking around and as Ben said, taking questions and hearing about your projects and seeing where we can take the conversation further.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Really appreciate, again, more just great insight in terms of following through on all those steps. I think one thing that maybe some folks are feeling a little overwhelmed by these big picture lofty, well, we have to have everything figured out. We need to know how all these grants work together. I'm just a community center. How do I do that? And one piece of the puzzle that can sometimes help with those questions is a consultant. So when we talk about layers of grants, sometimes you can get a grant to hire a consultant, to hire someone who does this full-time professionally, to be a piece of your fundraising or be a piece of your looking for other grants as part of the project. So that can be a real relationship. So that's kind of an angle that we wanted to address as well, because it can be an important part of projects. So we have Lezak, who's the principal at ADL Consulting. And in addition to having a lot of grant writing expertise, also just to talk a little bit about what might a relationship look like with a consultant in one of these community development projects, if that becomes the piece of a puzzle for folks. So thanks, Anne, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alyssa. And I am so glad to see so many folks from all over the state. And I know you all have incredible ideas. I don't do grant consulting anymore. I teach grant writing workshops and classes, which I love. And I have to tell you, there are just so many creative, connected, and dedicated folks who have wonderful projects, but they're not all going to get funded. So we want to make sure that yours do. So hiring a consultant can be a really positive and helpful way to get your grant funded. But I do have suggestions for that. So first of all, I called myself a ghost grant writer for a number of years, and agencies would hire me and I would know nothing about the program and often nothing about the agency until they brought me in. And people would say, well, how could you possibly do that? Well, to me, I think it's a real benefit in some ways when you bring someone in from outside who doesn't understand your program, and they are going to work with you, partner with you to write your proposal. The first thing you have to do is make sure that they really do understand why you matter, why you make a difference, why this is important and how it works. Because if I, as the consultant, am not clear about it, then you're probably not going to get the grant because the folks who are going to fund it are not clear about it. What I tell people, and I'll pretend that I'm still doing it, I'll talk in the first person, in the present tense, even though I don't do it anymore. What I tell people is that your job is to respond to this request to a competitive grant where there are 10 or 12 or 20 or 50 of you, and 10 or 15 or 20% of you will get funded. And you have to understand the reviewers don't know and don't care about you until you make them know and care about you. And in order to do that, you have to be able to explain from an outsider's point of view why it matters. So what better way to do that than to bring an outsider in who then has to understand it and be able to explain it. So that's kind of how that worked. What does the grant writing consultant do other than being able to see it from the outsider's viewpoint? The benefits are you're hiring someone who is a proven writer who really understands grantees, and what grantees is, as some of you others have said, it's not some fancy esoteric language. It's clear, plain writing that explains the project and responds directly to each of the criteria. They're a code designer and code developer who can really help you figure out what the specifics are of what you want to do and lay it out. And they're an expert on making sure that you do respond to each of the criteria in order and get it right on the page and get all those points. Like both Patrick and Ben, I happen to have 3 guiding pieces of advice. What do you know? It seems to work that way. 1, set realistic expectations for what your consultant will do. This is an active partnership. I can't tell you how many times someone calls me up and says, well, can you write the grant? We'll send you the information, then we'll check in with you in a couple of weeks. That is absolutely not the way it works. You cannot build a beautiful castle from a few sticks on the ground. It has to be a real close working relationship. So what the grant writer, what the consultant does is when you, the organization, tell them what it is you want to do and why you want to do it, they can help you take it from a great idea, which I usually see people have a great idea, but then I start asking them, well, who's going to do it? What's going to happen in month 1? Where are you going to get your, you have these great partners. What are they going to do? What are your staff qualifications? Who are you going to hire and when? Those are the kind of questions that I find that as a consultant, I can really be helpful in. It's really project development. Many people have this fantastic idea, but the consultant can help you really get it down to, okay, what's going to happen now? How much does it cost? Where are we going next? And just build that detailed plan that shows that you've actually really thought out what it is you want to do and why it matters. Another piece is Patrick talked about the data, and that's a really important piece. And yes, you want to tell a compelling story. That's very important, but it's so important to be able to back it up with local, regional, and national data. And that's where a consultant can come in. I love doing that kind of research and finding out, why, whether it's low-income house. Anyway, I won't go into details, but there is so much data out there that you may not have time to do, but that's the consultant's job, to be very familiar with all those sources and understand how to use the data to help buttress your case. And the other piece is really making sure that you've covered all the bases and that you're looking at all the different pieces. What do you need to make this work? Staffing, IT resources, furnishing, special tools. And to me, the more specific you can get, the stronger your proposal is going to be. And a good consultant will really kind of hold your feet to the fire and say, it's not enough to say that we want to redo our town hall and make it beautiful and accessible and have people enjoy it. I want, as the consultant, and this is what I think the reviewer wants, to paint a picture so we can see how long is it going to take? What's it going to look like? When you say we're going to have all these activities, what do you mean? Is it story hour for kids? Is it older people coming in for a meal? Is it legislative breakfast? Whatever it is, I push you and get you to really think very practically. Why does this matter? How is it going to be used? What does it look like? So that's one, is that you're going to set those realistic expectations and presume that you are going to be actively working with that consultant the whole time. You don't just hand over a proposal. How do we do this? The way we do it, and the way it's worked with me time and time again, is you assign a primary contact. This, to me, is the secret to using a consultant well. You can send all kinds of information to me. You can, tell me what you want to do, but it doesn't work to say, for example, one time I was working on a grant to build a new Head Start classroom in a different town from where there'd ever been one before. And if they had just given me the information and said, now go write the grant, I would have been completely hamstrung, because I needed that one contact to tell me things like, you know, who knows, to get me all this information. Who knows about marketing and recruitment for the kids? Who knows about the expertise of the teachers and how you recruit teachers? Who knows about the renovation piece? Who do I, you know, who handles the scheduling? Who do I talk to about the partnerships outside? And if I had had to do that as a consultant, I would have had to first build relationships and chase those people all around. And it would have completely made it a very inefficient process. So to me, you pick one person, and for a larger grant, two people. And when I say larger, I mean probably anything over about 30,000. There's your program person and your budget person. And both Patrick and Ben talked about how important the budget is. And I have seen so many times when people write a grant, and then, in fact, I had one where I stayed up till 3 a.m. one time I was brought on as an emergency consultant, because at the day before the grants, they say, oh yeah, we have to do a budget. Well, that is a ridiculous way to do it. So you need that budget person right along, because as you're thinking through your project, you're going to do things like, you're going to say, let's say with this Head Start project, you think that you're going to have 3 outside partners come in. One's going to do music, and anyway, all sorts of different things. And then you realize, oh, we can't, you know, we don't really, I don't think we can afford that. You work with the budget person, you say, well, instead of once a week, they're going to come once a month. Or let's just say another program that I worked on, daycare program for elderly people with Alzheimer's and dementia conditions. We're going to have, we want a recreation director. Great idea. We start doing the money and realize, oh, we can only have a recreation director 30% of the time, not 100%. If you're not working with the budget person right along the way, you're going to get lost. So you need a program person and a budget person. And it's very important to realize that's from the beginning. And that's the person who your consultant will go to and ask questions and help make it real, and say, who will provide us the information about the construction cost? Who's going to provide us the information about that recreation director and what kind of skills and abilities? Who's going to tell us about the meals program, and what does it mean when we say we're going to give healthy, nutritious meals? That makes it real. And you cannot have your consultant running around trying to chase down those people. And number 3, which relates very much to number 2, be there for the consultant. Be there for the consultant. What I tell people is, I don't think I've ever written a competitive grant proposal where there wasn't a deadline. And a deadline means that you're always behind, that this is, you're working against the clock. I've always said the grant isn't done until until the minute. I mean, I'm terrible last minute, till the hour it's due. You can always make it better. You can always make it stronger. And so you need to assign that person to what I always say is, you're going to be my best friend for the next 6 weeks for a large, like a large federal grant, or the next 2 weeks if it's a, small foundation grant. Because if you can't be there to, for example, let's say that you're going to do renewing a park, and you've thrown out ideas and you've had these brainstorming sessions and you have all the community groups, and you have this one program person who's assigned to me, the consultant. One of the ideas is, well, we're going to have community garden space. Well, if I can't reach you for 3 or 4 days to find out if you've decided that you really are going to do that community garden space, then I am really delayed, and I'm going to be in a huge rush once we get that back together and you say, oh, by the way, I meant to tell you, we dropped that idea. We're not doing that. And that is a tremendous disservice to your consultant and to your process. So you have to have someone who isn't going to, oh, by the way, I'll be on vacation for 6 days during this. Or, my baby's going to be born. Sorry, it doesn't work. I've tried it. So those are really my 3 key points. Set realistic expectations for what the consultant will do, understanding that it's a very active, ongoing partnership. Assign a primary contact, and if it's a larger grant, you also need a budget contact. And then once you've done that, be there for the consultant. And that's how you make it real, how you're able to build a compelling, strong proposal that will get funded, and really that reviewers will understand that, what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, why it matters. And that's what I can do as a consultant. but not unless I have that active partnership. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you so much, Anne. A lot of great tidbits. Really appreciate the you can't build a castle out of sticks is really staying in my mind for the moment, but maybe it's all because we need that one primary contact. I'm really excited that kind of this has been a little abstract in terms of us talking about big picture funding and working with consultants, but to really anchor it back in community. So we have Gail Nunziata, who is part of the Brook Community Center and actually has experience, a wealth of experience, not only in historic preservation and former roles with Latches Arts and Latches Hotel, but with a community development project on the ground, pulling together some of these different pieces. So I'm really excited to have her share some stories with us to kind of leave everyone on this high note of that this is, you know, despite being maybe complicated and a lot of moving pieces, something that really is achievable. And Gail, I have some visuals as well, so just let me know if you'd like me to share the picture, but thank you again for being with us and excited to hear more about the project. Oh, you're muted, Gail. We can't hear you yet.
Here I am. I'm excited to be here and actually to bring all of this home. What we heard from Ben, Patrick, and Ann. Brook Community Center in Guilford is a terrific case study to ground all of the things that have been said here this morning already. Anytime you want to put up the picture, Alyssa, that'd be great. So our project started really in 2011 when the town of Guilford celebrated its 250th birthday. And there was a year-long celebration. And many of the events happened at the Grange Hall, which looked the way it looks on the left. And there was such a successful year, and the town of Guilford felt so good about itself that they decided they wanted this goodwill to be able to be perpetuated. So they called in the Vermont Council on Rural Development to do a town visit process. And that was the best thing that they could have done, because over the course of the months, the town, people who were interested got together and talked and honed and honed and talked and came up with projects, and bubbling to the top of all of the projects was rehabbing the Grange Hall, because they had just experienced all these wonderful community events there, and it was too much of an asset to let go. The enthusiasm bubbled into a task force that came after that. And these people included Grange members and non-Grange members to really talk about what it would mean to take on this project. And the Grange itself doesn't have, it's a service organization, has a different IRS designation, doesn't have a 501c3, and they didn't have the ability to do the fundraising. They didn't really have the capacity as a group to do it either. So this task force that came together was just a disparate group of people, townspeople. I was not involved at that point. And they just talked it through for a long time. And what they decided to do was turn into a board. And that's when I came on, when they decided that to have a board. And I live in Brattleboro, but I'm an honorary Guilford resident because I have a little cabin in the woods there. And with the experience that I had with old buildings, they thought that I might be able to be interested in this, which I was. So, so we developed a task force. We got our 501c3. And at that point, we had somebody in town was an architect and did like a back of the envelope calculation of, the things it needed, code this, code that, accessibility. And he came up with like, maybe $750,000 worth of work. And we said, well, we can do that. So after that, we decided that we would need a feasibility study, as was spoken about already. But actually we had a parallel track of feasibility studies. We had a fundraising feasibility study and a building conditions assessment study. So those two studies were ongoing. They were funded by the board because Patrick was saying that community block grant program goes through municipalities, and another group had already gotten the ear of the town of Guilford to put in a grant application for themselves for this technical expertise. So we just funded it, and we had those two studies. Well, it turns out that the fundraising feasibility consultant said that we could probably raise $1 million, and we were all excited about that. And the architectural and engineering plan said your project will probably cost 2.4 million. So we were in a little bit of a tailspin. And then, so we enacted one of Ben's big items where we called for help. And who do you think we called for help? Well, Paul Brune, of course. So, you know, you call Paul Brune and he says, don't do anything, I'll be right there, bang. And before you know it, there's Paul Brune at your door. So Paul came and he helped us talk through it, break it into phases. He had a come to Jesus meeting with the architects, and we were able to value engineer a little bit of it, put some of it aside, and we came up with a 2-phase project. So that at least felt doable. And it was no longer 2.4 at that moment in time. So we just jumped in, and jumping in was probably the riskiest thing we did. We just decided to go. So we assembled our team and we decided to go. Now, the other things that Ben and Patrick were both saying are also on my list, and that's build relationships. Build relationships. So building relationships with funders. Well, we already had a relationship with Paul and the Preservation Trust of Vermont. We talked to people in the Division of Historic Preservation in the state. We talked to ACCD. We talked to everybody we could think of, and just let them know we were going to do this project and that we would be asking for their expertise at some point, and hopefully that expertise would turn into grant dollars for us. We built relationships with local donors. That was an important step. And once you convince your board that they really need to go out and talk to people they know, you know, things happen. And success can build on success. And the first time you sit down and talk to somebody and walk out with a pledge for $5,000, man, you want to go do that again, and you want to get $6,000 next time. And so we were building relationships with our local funders. We activated the community. So many things had gone on in that Grange Hall. It's 125 years old now, and so many things had come on. There were so many people who remembered things that had happened, and there were dances and there were romances back in the day, and there were so many things. So we went ahead and we have an annual apple pie social. We have a community, we give the building out for community days. Well, this is all pre-COVID, of course. Gave the community out for community days where a group could use the building without paying rent, because rental was part of our income stream for operations. We built town partnerships for the use of the building when it would be done. And in phase 1, we were able to start utilizing those partnerships with the town, with the school, with the Grange itself, and with the group called Guilford Cares that does the food pantry, and also Tai Chi and that kind of thing for seniors. We had an impact statement that was extremely useful as we went ahead, because you want your project, as Patrick was saying, to show the ripple effect. So we made an impact statement about the social, cultural, educational, agricultural, recreational, and economic development impact that a refurbished Grange would have. We established relationships with regulators. So Brian Johnson from the Department of Fire Safety and people like him were on our call lists to let us know, for us to let them know that we were going to be doing this. We would, of course, need their expertise. We would, of course, need their permits later. So why not start the process early? And we did a promotional piece, which helped us tell our story when we went everywhere. When we went to the local funders, when we went to the state and government funders, it was just worth it. It was worth developing this piece because, first of all, it's a prop. It's nice to come in with something in your hands, and then it told the whole story. So, Liz, I don't know if you want to put that up and just scroll through it for a minute. So Brook Community Center now, we finished phase 1, and that's what the building looked like on the other side. It's not nearly done. That was a golden bubble of a moment for that picture. But we did, in phase 1, we were able to do some code and accessibility upgrades. We put in the fire escape. We put in some electrical fire safety items. We put in the ramp. We put in 2 bathrooms that were like the Taj Mahal compared to the bathrooms that had been in that building forever. And now we're closed because of COVID. We're ready to, we finished our fundraising, almost. Oh, so back to the fundraising piece. After we got the $2.4 million heart attack, we ended up with a $1.2 million budget, which we could swallow. And that actually, over the course of the years, and adding in all the soft costs and all the regulatory permitting fees, is now actually 2.1 million. So they weren't far off at the beginning, but we have evolved as a group. We've matured as an organization. We just put our ducks right back in a row and went back to the community, went back to the funders, and we're just finding a way to get this done. Because the community, because of our work with the engagement, the community really understands the need for the building, and nobody can underestimate the idea that having a place to gather when all this is over and we're ready to gather again is going to make a huge difference in how we heal from this, from the pandemic. So Brook Community Center, I have to say, has really been a wonderful story. And we're more than delighted to be able to say we're starting soon. We're going to have insulation. We're going to have an elevator to the 2nd floor because there's a little auditorium on the 2nd floor. It's going to be a full basement for weatherization and storage. And we just can't wait. It's been a long haul, but we've used all our partnerships, and we're ready.
Thank you so much, Gail. It's incredible to hear about all you've been able to accomplish, and I find very inspiring, and hopefully for others as well. I just want to thank all of our panelists for just the incredible expertise that they shared. I think I have several pages of notes of key takeaways and bullet points, and I've seen it going back and forth in the chat, but we are recording this and it will be posted to the VCRD website along with all of our workshops, just because I know we are a little tight on time for some folks. But again, if you want to share this with others, but again, just if everyone wants to do a virtual round of applause, thank you to Gail and Patrick and Ben for all of the incredible insights. Really have a lot to take away. With that, again, we are getting close to that 11 o'clock hour. So if folks need to leave, we certainly understand, no hard feelings. If anyone has a quick question and wants to raise a hand or put it in the chat for our panelists. And again, we'll connect at 11 if folks do want to do breakouts. I'm also going to put my email in the chat. I'm happy to connect with folks about projects as well and be a resource. But I think one real takeaway I have today is to certainly not be a stranger, and feel free to reach out to folks who have been here today. So with that, I guess maybe if we have one question for the group, anyone have anything pressing that they want to hear things? I see John maybe saying something.
Gail, I see a question about time frame from the community visit to the beginning of renovations. Do you have a sense of how long that took for the Grange?
About 2 years. Yeah, the community visit was like 2013.
Okay.
And it was probably some early 2016 when we really got going.
Great.
We-
Another
we-
question we had in
No, and
chat.
I have
Oh,
to
go ahead.
change, I have to correct myself. We purchased the building in January of 2018. So that's when we were able to start swinging hammers because we owned it.
Great. Another question from down south, which is, how do you do that review of what grants are even out there? Like that, some of that information collection. I don't know if any of you want to give a quick shot at that. Ben, I see you unmuted. You want to?
Well, yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think a good start, you know, and other folks have talked about it on this call, is breaking it down into buckets, right, of a logical progression. That it would start with community engagement, right? Like, was there a VCRD process? Was there some kind of other community engagement process that identified this specific project as important to the community, right? That's step one, then feasibility, then implementation, then long-term sustainability, right? If you have those kinds of, that sense of those kind of 4 buckets, then I think you meet with those funders and say, hey, these are the 4 stages of our project. What programs or opportunities do you have to be helpful, right? So like somebody might come to us around, you know, somebody might go to VCRD around a community engagement process, right? And then might come to the Preservation Trust for an architectural assessment of a building, right? Or someplace, a rural business development grant through USDA to do a feasibility study, right? For a project. And then, you know, the implementation funds, once you actually have those kinds of, those needs identified. So I think that it really starts, if you think about the different stages of your projects, and then have conversations with all of your funders to say, where can you plug in on any one of these different stages? I think that's one way where you can start to kind of map out that plan.
Yeah, and I would just follow up with that on Ben's too. Oftentimes, us as funders, we will also suggest what we call funders meetings, and we'll say, hey, you know, this is great that you've called me, but have you at ACCD and Vermont Community Development Program, but have you reached out to USDA Rural Development? You know, if it's a housing project, we might, on the telephone, I might tell you of a couple housing funders that we typically work with. Or if it's a community based project, we'll tell you about a couple community funders that we often partner with on projects, and we'll say, hey, why don't you reach out to these folks and call us all together, and let's all sit down and we can get all the funders in one room together. And oftentimes just kind of it can be challenging to start, but just picking up the phone and having the call with that one contact, that one funder that you might have, we'll get that ball rolling a little bit, and that funder might have some suggestions for you and places to go as well.
You know, I see like a more specific question around farmers markets. And one thought I have is sometimes rather than go to a funder, go to another network. For example, the Farm to Plate network, and some of the staffers there, they're going to have a pretty good sense of what other farmers markets have found for resources and some sense of that. So sometimes it's not about sort of going to a funding network, but instead a more sort of subject specific network as a way to get a point of access and some ideas for some resources. Anne, I see a hand. Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
I would also like to direct everyone to the Vermont Community Foundation website. The Vermont Community Foundation is the largest funder of grants in Vermont and has all kinds of different grants, from quite large ones that require a number of partners to really little ones where you can get, for example, my little town of Minden, Vermont, that I used to live in, got, I think, a $500 grant to have a community celebration after the big flood of several years ago. Another one I know got one to a $1,000 grant to there was a beautiful tree in the town square that was falling down, and the $1,000 grant was able to, you know, stabilize that sort of thing. So the Vermont Community Foundation is very important for their own grants, and also for the Vermont Foundations, Vermont Guide to Foundations, which is on their website, and you can, it's very searchable. And it talks about every foundation that funds grants in Vermont, not just Vermont foundations. Most of them are not in Vermont. So I really urge you, if you haven't spent any time on that website, to go there.
Great. I think just to do a little time check, we're at 11:02. We do really find it's valuable to get into some small groups and just talk through with others, sort of what you're up to, and do a little bit of a kind of a crowdsourcing of solving some challenges. So I think we want to shift to that at least in the next minute or two, but I do want to open it up if there's any last questions. Alyssa, are you seeing any, or you want to throw one out there to bring things to a close?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're great. I think a lot has been offered. And again, thank you everyone for all the comments, and please continue to reach out. I think, as we've said, sometimes it's a more detailed follow-up about a specific project and what might be a fit. And again, we're certainly happy to be a resource. I'm seeing another list of farmers market coming in the chat. So definitely a lot of resources. But yes, I think we found great expertise in these groups to talk through some specific programs and start brainstorming, again, as we see happening in the chat right now.
Awesome. Well,
is there a place where that's compiled somewhere?
That's great, but we were just actually kind of discussing that in our group that I left a little accidentally and a little prematurely. Not exactly in one specific clearinghouse area. One person in our group was saying how they've over the years have been trying to develop that on their own and have split out the different funding categories between housing, community development, outdoor recreation, and tried to keep their own spreadsheets of all those different funding sources. Yeah, no, it certainly is a challenge. And I think that's a great strategy that the individual in our group was talking to, is you start to, as you start to contact and connect with all the different funders, is to keep their spreadsheet, try and put it into a spreadsheet and list what are the type of projects that they typically fund, what are the mission behind the funder, and what's their funding timeline, because every funder does have a slightly different timeline. And then you can start to develop your own list that you can start to reference back to as well.
Yeah, I started that. It's just hard.
Yeah, it is. It's a challenge. I mean, Vermont Community Foundation, I think, has a great list. Somebody posted that community planning and revitalization division at ACCD has a great list of places to get started. And sometimes it's just a matter of fundraising is a full-time job without a doubt, and it's certainly a challenge to go through each one and go down the rabbit hole of each funder's website to find all these pieces and critical pieces of information and to track it yourself for sure.
Welcome back, everybody. We already got started. We're just sharing a few quick reflections. If there's any points of further inquiry from your conversations, I would just kind of open it up for you all to share any last questions or thoughts from your breakout groups, if anyone has those as we wrap things up here.
I'd like to just follow up from what Patrick said. It is tough if you're new to this. You have to basically go to every state department on and sub department. But I do think we talked a little in our group about the importance of the regional planning commissions. This is their job in many ways to gather and understand this information. And if I were new, I would go two places. I would go to the Vermont Community Foundation, and I gave you the wrong name. It's the Vermont Directory of Foundations that you're going to look at in addition to the community foundations offerings. And then definitely, I mean, you can show up as a complete newbie to your planning commission, and they should be very happy to have you. And they have people who have worked with other folks in your region doing the kinds of grants that you do. That is their job. And that's exactly where I would go if I were new.
That's great advice. Anything else as further thoughts or reflections here?
The last thing I would just say is that to be generous to yourself and be patient. That this community and economic development is measured in decades, not years, right? It's true. It's the seeds that we plant now that 20 years from now really come to fruition. And like Gail's project's like incredibly impressive, frankly, at how quickly it's moved along. That it takes years and years for these, and that's okay, right? We all want it to be like done tomorrow, but it's actually too, the real goal of what we're trying to do, I think, is build community, right? And what better way to build community than by working together in shared endeavor over years to have something happen. So just be patient with yourself. It takes time.
Yeah, and one thing that came up in our group too, just to build on that, is be patient and create little benchmarks, little successes for yourself along the way that you can reach. So it's not, you don't have the overarching finished product in front of you, but you can hit those little milestones to keep you motivated and the community engaged and the community motivated as well.
Yeah, for me, it was the bathrooms. I you know, not everybody is excited about the bathrooms as I am, but they're a whole new level.
And they're accessible, right?
They're accessible, yes, yes. We had 2 little water closets about this wide, seriously, side by side, and right on the dining room. So there was no cord or anything. You just opened this little door and there you were. So I'm all about the bathrooms.
So what do you do about a project when you don't have time? When you've got a supervisory union that's trying to off a building in your community and do it within a month?
Wow.
I think you try to buy time, right? And you know, in that scenario, like not knowing any of the specifics or anything like that, to me, that's all about community engagement and making sure that the decision makers are aware that a community is behind a project. And I think it's really difficult in a month to come up with, you know, this is what the end goal is going to be like. These are the sources and uses of funding. Like, we have a plan ready to go in a month. Like, from my experience, I think that that's challenging, but I do think it's entirely possible. If there's a will, there's a way to hit a pause button in a community. And as long as the decision makers know there's opportunities out there to have a positive outcome, we just need time to fully explore them before you make a rash decision. That's what I don't know. Other people might have ideas, but that's what I would suggest.
Rebecca Sanborn Stone from your neighboring community over in Bethel often uses this phrase, go slow to go fast. And like that advance work before you get to that stage of like a hardened proposal is really important to your path to success. So somehow figuring out how to create that space is really valuable. You know, I'm sensitive to everyone's time.
We have two communities that really need engaging. One of them wants out and the other wants to stay in. And that's what's forcing this to happen at such a rate. I mean, basically they're saying we have the right of first refusal if we take it by X date in April. Otherwise, we're going to put it up for sale. And frankly, good luck with that in this day and age.
I'm sensitive to everyone's time. We're a little bit over here. I really want to express huge appreciation for Alyssa, who put so much work into putting this together, and for our team of presenters, Patrick and Gail and Ben and Ann. Really some great content today. So just want to thank everyone, and thanks for coming out, and you know, be in touch with us. We really are happy to field further questions from you all as we move forward. So
Great.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Bye.